Hola a todas y todos. Soy Julio César Rivas, periodista y corresponsal de la agencia EFE en Canadá, país en el que vivo desde hace más de 20 años. En primer lugar, me gustaría reconocer que resido en Toronto, el tradicional territorio de muchas naciones indígenas, como los Mississaugas of the Credit, los Anishinaabe, los Chippewa, los Haudenosaunee y los Wendat. Gracias por acogernos. Este año el Festival de Cine Canadiense de Madrid presenta una increíble selección de 6 películas que nos acercan al Canadá de hoy en día. En esa selección destacan varias obras realizadas por creadoras indígenas o que reflejan la realidad de First Nations, Métis e Inuit, los 3 grupos aborígenes de Canadá. Las cifras oficiales nos dicen que en Canadá viven hoy en día 1,7 millones de indígenas, entre una población de 38 millones de personas. El grupo más numeroso son los First Nations, las primeras naciones, con casi 1 millón. Los Métis representan algo más de medio millón, y los Inuit, los pobladores de los territorios más septentrionales del país, alrededor de 65.000. Lo que las cifras también nos indican es que la población indígena de Canadá es la que tiene la mayor tasa de crecimiento demográfico, varias veces superior al del resto de los habitantes del país. Es imposible resumir en esta presentación la rica historia de los indígenas canadienses y las complejas relaciones que existen hoy en día entre las comunidades aborígenes y el resto de Canadá. Pero sí que es imprescindible señalar que un país surgido de la colonización europea en el continente americano tiene enormes deudas con los indígenas y muchos conflictos sin resolver con los pobladores originarios de Turtle Island, el continente americano. La reciente Comisión de la Verdad y la Reconciliación de Canadá calificó las acciones del país contra los indígenas como un genocidio. En los últimos años, las nuevas generaciones de indígenas, apoyados en la lucha y resistencia de sus antepasados, han hecho oír su voz con una renovada fuerza en todos los ámbitos de la sociedad canadiense: el activismo político y social, la economía, la literatura, las artes plásticas y, por supuesto, el cine. Algunas de esas voces son las que están hoy con nosotros.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I love Madrid. I've been there once before. My name is Malaya Qaunirq Chapman. I was born in Iqaluit, raised in Pang, and then Los Angeles, and then I moved back to Nunavut. And I was sent this audition opportunity to audition for Restless River. And I was home in LA for Christmas. And I sent a terrible, awful, embarrassing, cringeworthy audition tape. It was really bad. But thankfully, Marie-Hélène believed in me for some miraculous reason. So Restless River, I play this character named Elsa, whose story is kind of, you're following Elsa's life from like a really early teenager up to her older age, where she over time has a son that really changes the course of her life. And she's faced with many decisions and many circumstances in life, but she's the character that doesn't give up. She perseveres through everything. You know, things happen to her, but she's not a victim of anything. She's an admirable character. As I was reading her, I had a picture of her in my mind, and I thought I was thinking like, this is how I'm going to play her. But then she quickly kind of, me and Elsa coming together embodied something else. And Marie-Hélène and I's conversation, and you know, the image of Elsa in my mind was one thing, but once I acted it out, she came to life. And it was an amazing experience. It was my first feature, and ever since, this is what I want to do with my life. And I'm super grateful to have been introduced to this new like feature world and acting in a serious role, because I've played like comical roles, and I've played roles where we're portraying our culture. But yeah.
And also you have been also a journalist with APTN.
Yeah, I was a journalist with APTN for about 2 years. It was through an opportunity. I was actually, how I was introduced to the job is I was interviewed for something that had and they were doing a story on me, and I was standing there and I was like, I like the camera, like I'm kind of comfortable. And so I asked, I was like, are there job opportunities? And then the journalist was like, yeah, there is, do you want to apply? And I was like, yes. 2 weeks later I left my job, and it was a cushy job. It was comfortable, but my life, how I operate, I make sure I never get too comfortable. So I did that job for a couple of years and then left that to do TV.
That's a great introduction. Tell me about Restless River. How was for you to interpret that character that is in between two different worlds?
It actually, you know, Elsa's life and my life kind of parallel in that way, where I was raised in a very small community of 2,000 people, and then from there I moved to Montreal and then LA. So as I was reading her character, and I was like, oh, this is natural to me, I've done this. So there was a lot of times where I was playing her character and I was like, you know, I relate with this, you know, having to adapt to change in a moment's situation. And you know, there are things that happen in your life that you have no control over, and you just kind of plow through it. You know, things get hard, but you don't stop. You absolutely do not stop. You make your situation better.
You're also one of the main actresses in a short film, Abiliak, that is part of the Embargo project, that is going to be also in the festival. And the story centers in two women that are in love and have to struggle to be together. I'm curious about how is the reality of the LGBTQ people in the Inuit society, and how do they fit in the Inuit traditions?
That's a really good question. Inuit were colonized in a major way through religion and forced housing and forced colonization, really. And so a lot of the traditional, really, like, let's think back to traditional life. Inuit have words for lesbian, Inuit have words for gay, Inuit have words for two-spirited. And typically when a culture has a name for it, it happened. And so through colonization, that was wiped out. It was no longer accepted. It was no longer okay because of the church's presence in the north. But right now, I am seeing a major shift, especially in Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut. There are LGBT flags. They have LGBT classes and LGBT proms in the high school. And I see there are a few people in Iqaluit that I know that have successfully transitioned. And she is strong. She's a leader. She has traveled the world and done many things. And Marie-Hélène's daughter actually is LGBT. She's trans, and really, like, in this time, like, this is a time to celebrate them and really accept them back. And through the film, I learned that there are words for lesbian, gay, and so on. So I was playing the character, and it was a beautiful script. That script is so beautiful. I really still love that short film and the whole Embargo project. I went to Toronto Indigenous Film Festival and I saw all of them, and they're incredible. I'm so excited for you guys to see them. Each one has been challenged to do a short based off of, so like, for example, Alethea Aknaqtuk Burrell does like serious documentaries. So her challenge was to do like a romance storytelling, which is way outside of her comfort zone. So each Embargo project director was challenged in the same way, and everyone just really did amazing. The script is beautiful. I really, really love that. And I've created such a strong bond with each character in the film too. I'm excited for you guys. That's awesome.
That's great. Malaya, my last question. In an interview in 2004, you said something like the Inuit don't like to speak with the media, and you were encouraging people to speak more about the Inuit, about your life and the community. Has that changed? Is the Inuit talking more about what is to be Inuit and to live in this society?
I have seen a small shift, and since the beginning of my TV career, I see people with the generation changing, being more open-minded to taking on opportunities in film and representing our culture. But as far as like news outlets and stuff, the comfort level is more with Inuit, from Inuit to Inuit. If there are Southerners coming to the North and just saying like, let me tell your story, let me interpret your story the way I see it, there's a lot of resistance there still. But I think we are ready to start telling our own stories. And I really hope that that changes over time, because I still struggle, because I still work in television. I still struggle to find people that are comfortable enough to tell our stories, whether it's hunting, whether it's cooking. Like, there are really open people, but Inuit are very humble people, and they don't speak out of everything often. Like if you're really good at something, they will never tell you they're really good at something. They lead by example. You learn by watching. And yeah, not to say that the film industry in the North hasn't taken off, because it has. There have been so many films, like Marie-Hélène's films, Alethea's films. I made a film, and then The Grizzlies, and then Two Lovers in a Bar. There are the career and the industry in Nunavut is growing, and people are more aware of film and the opportunity. And like, I have a dream and I can actually do that. And having leaders and examples to look up to really does make a difference. And I really believe that the future of the North, as far as film goes, is really bright. We have brilliant people that are natural artists, because to be, you are a natural storyteller. You are naturally artistic, and you naturally know yourself and your culture, so you could do it from your perspective. And I really look forward to the future with film and young people following their dreams. And I will be there cheering them on so loud.
Malaya, thank you very much, and we are really looking forward to see you in Restless River and in the Bargo project. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
Sure thing. My name is Tracey Deer. I am a Mohawk filmmaker, writer, director. I'm here at the festival with my first feature film. It's called Beans. It's a coming of age story of a young Mohawk girl through the summer of an Indigenous uprising that actually did happen historically here in Canada 30 years ago. It's now been called the Oka Crisis. And I was a 12-year-old girl through that. I lived through that. So the film is very much inspired by my own coming of age journey, going from an innocent, very carefree, confident Indigenous kid to a much darker, complicated space as I grew into becoming an Indigenous woman. And that summer is when that innocence was shattered, and it's been 30 years of sort of piecing it back together for myself, and making this film was a part of that piecing things back together, part of the healing for myself.
Actually, you just answered my first question, but I have to say that I remember growing up in Madrid, and the first real news that I remember about Canada in the Spanish newspapers was about the Oka crisis, and to me it was a shock. You're talking about how this movie is part of a process of healing. Uh, can you tell us how making the movie is helping you in that healing process?
Absolutely. So after living through the Oka crisis, the message that I was left with as a young girl was that I didn't matter. To be violently attacked by grown adults and to have police officers stand by and let that happen. The only way for me to process that was to come to the conclusion that I was not important. I was a second-class citizen, and it was okay to do those things to me, my mother, my sister, my people. And so that led to a period of very low self-worth, very low self-esteem, depression, suicidal thoughts. Just my adolescence was so dark. And so a big part of the work that I do, I've been in this industry for 20 years. A big part of it, I now realize, is about being seen, being heard, being understood, being loved. And so the work that I put out there is all with that goal in mind. In terms of this film specifically, it's going right back to the heart of these issues for myself. And we were so massively misunderstood. We were massively misrepresented that summer. The mainstream media called us terrorists, and the Canadian Army came in and pointed tanks at our homes, at my family. And as a young girl living through it, again, so hard to process why anyone would point a tank, and not just one tank. I mean, there were dozens of tanks. Why anyone would point tanks at people I love. So I want to make sure that this part of our history is, never forgotten. I want people to experience it the way we experienced it, at least the way I experienced it, the way my family experienced it. The film very much follows, one specific family throughout this summer. And I want people to bear witness to what did happen to us. And my hope is that by the end of the film, you do love our young heroine and her family, and you leave the film wanting to do what you can to make things better for her and all those kids out there like her.
As you're telling us, that Beans is a very personal story because you live through that. And it must seem like an obvious question, but why is it important for Indigenous people to start telling their own stories and not letting others tell the stories?
So I feel like there is a very obvious answer there, and I happily will give it. We have our own truth to tell. We don't need our life, our feelings, our history. We don't need it interpreted by, and up until this point, it's been white people. Let's just say that. We don't need people who are so removed from our reality interpreting what they think our truth is. It's time for us to be able to share our own truths. And, for so long, especially as a little girl, I grew up not seeing myself reflected on the big or small screen. And that was another element to me believing I didn't matter, because if you mattered, you were on TV, and who was on TV pretty much the majority of the time? White people. So, the message, you get these messages all over the place. So not only is it important that we have the space to now tell our own stories with all the nuance and all the complexity that comes with it, but it's also super important that we see ourselves reflected back and we recognize ourselves. I don't want to see one-dimensional characters. I don't want to see an Indigenous character that actually has none of the realistic characteristics of somebody from our community, because those characters have been written over the years as well. But I don't recognize that person. I watch that one-dimensional Indigenous character who typically gets killed off, and I don't recognize them because they've been built in some bubble, some strange removed bubble. So I don't know why anyone would want those kinds of stories. I'm really excited that we have sort of stepped in. It's been a good 20 years that we've been building to show everyone what the stories we have to offer and the value we have to offer of authentic storytelling. I hate the fact that we've had to convince people because it seems so obvious, but here we are now, and I'm grateful for that.
The tone of the film is not from a victimized point of view, but more from a fighting and encouraging look from a powerful teenage girl. Why did you decide that approach was the right one?
Well, that's the truth of my people. Absolutely, we have been victimized, and we're talking 400 years of colonization, but throughout it all, we have persevered, we have been resilient, we have adapted, we have survived. So we aren't victims, we're survivors, we're thrivers. So that has definitely been the way I've been raised. And that is very integral and true to who Mohawk people are. And I would extend it to say, this is a part of being Indigenous. So it was a very natural choice for me to base the story in that theme.
Mm-hmm. And finally, the Oka crisis was a traumatic experience for First Nations, but also for the rest of Canada. Has Canada? Do you think that has Canada learned the lessons from the Oka crisis?
No, sadly, I don't think Canada has learned the lessons from the Oka crisis. And in fact, as we were working on the post of this film last year, we had very similar incidents, unfortunately, erupt across the country, and Canada responded in the exact same violent way that they did 30 years ago. So it's incredibly discouraging to know that we have not come very far in 30 years. I will preface that by saying I do think that there has been progress in different areas, but not enough, and certainly not when it comes to issues that are so important to us that we feel we need to take such dramatic action because we are not being given respect, we are not being given space. And unfortunately, that protest is being met with violence.
Thank you very much, Tracey, and we are really excited to be able to see your film in Madrid. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoy your film, Tracey. I think it's one of the most important film that's coming out of Quebec, to see the story told from this point of view, your point of view. It's historical. It's so important. And I'm so happy that it's you who told that story with your sense of, with the facility you have with your character. It's very intimate and at times funny, and it's very inside the story. It's great, and it's amazing to see people throwing rocks. I have chills on the bridge.
Thank you.
And you in the car. It's terrifying. And I was on the other side of that story, listening to the newspaper and marching in the street, in support, but it's not the same than seeing it. So it's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. a little emotional. Okay, so my name is Marie-Hélène Cousineau, and it's really fantastic to have the film in Madrid. The film is co-directed with Madeleine Valou, who's a Neno Kelder from Igloolik, who doesn't have access to internet really or Zoom and doesn't speak English or French. And I've been working with her and Susan Avignac, another elder, for 30 years this year, actually. And the film is a co-production between Quebec and Nunavut, so between Arnett Video, and I had to create a company to make the film. The film is taking place in Cookjoak, which was known before as Fort Chimo, and is based on a novel by a Canadian author, Gabrielle Roy. As Malaya said, when she read the book, she came back to me and, had a very different look at the character than Gabrielle Roy, which was amazing. Her take on the film and the character was more of a powerful woman, from her inside knowledge of her, culture. So we worked on that, and yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Even Malaya learned a new dialect to make this film. She was not speaking the Inuktitut of Cookjoak. So we work with the community, as usually when we do films, when we produce film, we produce them in the North, which is, a different way of producing than anywhere else in Canada. We go in community and we try to work with the people, find actors, art directors, people who will build the sets, who will make the costume. It's very important for us to work that way, although we need to bring technical team from the South to the North if we don't have the technical person in the North. So we did the same thing here. We didn't know Cookjoak. Nobody really, just a little bit, but we took a year before to go there, do some look at the sets, and the people from Cookjoak were really helping and collaborating and helping us being able to produce the film there and implicating as much of the community as possible. I don't know what was the question, but that's a little bit of the process of making the film.
The answer was better than the question, so don't worry. Let me ask you, because of course you were born in Quebec, but you moved, I think, in 1990 to Nunavut, and established Arnett Video Productions with Madeleine and Susan. Why did you decide to move to what is now Nunavut? I think that back then was still the part of the Northwest Territories. Why did you decide to go there, and what did you learn?
Well, I mean, it's a long story. I don't know if it's that is so interesting. My personal, ideas for going there. But basically, I was 30 years old or 29 when I moved to Igloolik, which was in the Northwest Territory. I moved with my partner of the time, and I was a video maker, and it's important for me to say that I was not a filmmaker. I mean, I was working in Montreal. I was a student in art and art history, and filmmaking at the time was, you have to go back in time. Filmmaking was kind of hard to do. Like you had to have certain connection. It was mostly controlled by men and, you know, probably white men also, but it was hard to make a film. It was, and then video came in like 1985, and with video, you can actually buy a video camera and, you know, make a video with your friend, and you don't need to follow all the steps, and you don't need the hierarchy of filmmaking. You know, you don't need the producer, the director, the this, and go down the ladder. So I was really into video making, which is let's make film, you know, videos with our friends, with whoever we want, and then look at them and decide, you know, what we want to make with them. And I had heard about Inuit making television, and I was fascinated by, they were working in community like this. They were creating another kind of television. And I had learned about Zacharias Kunuk, you know, which then went on to make a Tanarjuat and many other films. And I had learned that, you know, I invited him in Montreal to present his work. It was his first feature video called Kagik. And so I became friends with Zach and, you know, with his partner, Norman Cohn. And then they said, well, you know, you should come to Igloolik to start a video access center. I was working in video access center in Montreal. So I went to Igloolik for that. And when I arrived there, I felt at ease, well, with women more than with men. It was kind of separated a bit in the community. And, you know, 30 years ago, probably more than now in the culture. And then you know, I went on the community radio and I said, oh, you know, anybody interested in learning how to make videos? And there was IBC, Inuit Broadcasting Corporation, but it was more institutional, was more still controlled by, you know, an office in Ottawa. And, you know, and then those women, Madeleine and Susan, who were already 50 at the time, they didn't speak English. They came in, they checked me out, and they decided, yeah, okay, you know, we'll work with her. And so we started by working with Arts Grant, and to me as an artist, it was so rewarding not to have to work in some kind of hierarchy. I cannot say this word in English, hierarchy. And, you know, and for them, it was also interesting because, you know, they were learning from me and I was learning from them. It was really an exchange. And so we kept going like that for many years. And then it's true, we went on to do some feature films and we access other kind of funding. And then, you know, it was always the struggle to how do we keep our process and how do we produce a film that's $2 million, let's say, or, you know, more, but, you know, how can we fit in the system, but still keep this community-based work, or, you know, so it is a struggle to find ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Your films, including Restless River, usually center the relationships between Inuit and white Canadians. And you always show the effects of colonialism and the supplanting of old traditions. Why is that so interesting for you?
Well, because it's there, you know, it's part of the reality that not a lot of people talk about. And it's so important. It's like at the core of Canada, basically, which is, you know, colonizer coming in the country and saying, you know, we want this and we're going to take this land, and, you know, things deteriorated. So it's how this country was formed. So we're still living this in many ways. And, as Tracey said, is, some subjects are more into the open, but, there are realities that are still there. So, it's interesting to me to explore. And basically, I think on a very personal personal reason, I really loved my time in the North. I made really friendships and family ties that are still there. So, I feel like I've been, to be a witness also is important. Like if you have seen things that you think you need to tell because more people need to know, I think you can participate in that as much and well as you think.
The film Restless River, just to finish, has had a northern tour and has been screened in different Inuit communities, I understand. How was the film received by the Inuit?
Well, unfortunately, the tour was sort of cut with the pandemic. We showed it in Cousineau just in the fall before the pandemic started, which was amazing. The theater was full a few times in a row. And, I think that as Malaya was saying, Inuit are not the kind of people to say congratulations to you, but I think they are humble. And so, but, I think it was great. People showed up and, talked to the actors and talked to the teams. And we had exhibition of the costumes and, at a different level where people were involved in the producing and making the film. I think, it was a victory, it was great. So then we were supposed to tour Nunavik and Nunavut, but it was stopped. So now it's showing in an edited version. There is a new Inuit television right now that's accessible to people in Canada through a cable system and in the North, and they're showing it there. So every community can actually see it, which is amazing. But, you don't have the same feedback than when it's in the theater because you don't know who's watching it at home, but it's available.
Well, it's great. Congratulations, Marie-Hélène. Congratulations for the film and all what you have achieved.
Thank you.
Sure. Sego. My name is Zoe Hopkins. It's not at all an effort of patience to listen to these amazing women. It's so interesting. Like I'm in this, we're all in this Zoom life lately, and I'm just situating and landing. And what am I doing in every Zoom? It seems because I do a lot of different things. I teach language. I'm in a few ways right now. I'm teaching. I found myself teaching high school grade 9 Mohawk in person, which is very different from what my normal life is. I have been teaching Mohawk language online for a number of years, but now I'm doing this in-person thing. So I'm not teaching this week, but every other week I'm in front of a group of teenagers trying to teach them language, and it's been a really lovely gift. And listening to all of you speak, I feel my life flashing before my eyes because I feel like I can situate myself in every one of these stories. Listening to Malaya talk about the embargo project, that was such a gift in my life, which is where my film Sky World comes from. It's in a part of that program. And to hear you speak of it so generously and with such enthusiasm. Like, I'm just so honored and thrilled that this festival has invited this program to show, because, you know, we make these things and then we move on, and then to see them go on and live, you know, elsewhere, like the idea that we could all be in Madrid right now, like showing this body of work, like that's really exciting. We don't get to be there, but like the idea that we could, you know, is really amazing. That this film, Malaya, that you're in, that really, like, when I saw it in the theater or at Imaginative, I was just weeping. I was so weeping at how beautiful it was. And Tracey, when I saw your film at TIFF, sitting in my little living room, you know, watching it premiere, I was so proud of you. Oh my gosh. And just remembering, you know, where I was, where I was back in when this actually happened, you know, and seeing that part of my life. And I had a really weird Oka crisis experience. I was working on the film Black Robe. I was 15 years old. I was wearing braids and leather in the 16th century in a small town in Quebec. I was living in Chicoutimi for 2 months while we were making that film. And so it was this little tiny French town. And here we were, all these Native people with our braids and leather. And like, that's what they thought we were. And here we were walking around in town like that. It was very weird. And then I grew up in Ottawa, and I was went to French immersion. So I grew up reading Gabrielle Roy, you know, and at one time I was bilingue, you know, and I'm no longer bilingue. I don't remember how to speak French. I can still understand French, but it's been replaced by Mohawk language. You know, when I was learning language, when I moved back to Six Nations as an adult and like took immersion program, I could literally and physically feel the pathways in my brain where French existed, and my language was like building into that path. And I always, you know, I kind of was angry that I was fluent in a colonizing language, and not one of my own languages. I'm Heiltsuk on my mother's side. I was born in Bella Bella. I'm Mohawk on my father's side. You know, I live here in Six Nations. And I didn't speak either of those languages. I was really annoyed to be sitting in the first day of Mohawk language immersion, and I didn't even know how to say my own name. I didn't know how to count to 10. Like, I could count to 10, but only ever in order. I could, if you had to ask me the number 6, I'd have to count up to 6 to be able to say the number 6. I didn't know the names of the colors because I didn't grow up here, you know, so I was really ticked off that I could have an entire conversation all day in French and not in my own language. So I'm not sad that the French language has poof from my head. And I am so happy that now when I make films that touch on language or involve language somehow, that I'm doing that from a place where I can speak it, I can write it, I can understand it. And that makes me so happy. That's where Sky World comes from, this film. I was challenged in the Embargo Project to make a film with restrictions, like these really fun creative restrictions. Like mine were I had to make a surreal film. I had to work with a crew and cast of entirely new people, like people I hadn't worked with before, which is challenging. You know, you develop a shorthand as filmmakers, you know, working with your crew and whatnot, and to figure people out, you know, and you know, my DP, I ended up, you know, arguing with him all the time. So that was, and I'm not somebody who's confrontational or argumentative. So that was a really interesting learning thing to figure out how to stand your ground with somebody who just wants to fight, even when you're saying the same thing. And what else? I had to use an aspect of the handmade. Meaning that, like, in my past work, I've made films where, like, I have personally made some of the props or the costumes or something. Or used in-camera effects or in-camera editing and stuff. And I really love doing that. Oh, here's a little prop I made once. A little R2-D2 puppet. And he's in, if you Google Mohawk Star Wars, you'll see, like, a version of Star Wars. It's just silly. It's all in Mohawk. But Marie-Hélène, you reminded me like of that aesthetic of just like, you can make something, you know, you have a camera, you have some people, you know, you have people who want to make something, just make something, you know. So that's where the Mohawk Star Wars came out of. And I love just making stuff. If I could just like make pie and costumes and little movies, you know, for a living, I'd be so happy. But I do have to do lots of other things. Sometimes they want to give you a lot of money and you have to, you know, like let other people make professional props. So I've been lucky to have that sometimes. And what else? Oh, I added my own restriction. I had always wanted to make a one-shot film. So I added that was my one thing that I added myself. I was like, I want to tell this story in a single shot, which was just like my nerdy desire to like see if I could do it and challenge myself. And the guiding light for doing all of those rules and adding that one was remembering back to the first embargo project. Like we've done this twice now. I got to be part of it twice. And in the first meetings with the filmmakers, one of the filmmakers, Taika Waititi, was in the first one. He said, guys, like this isn't supposed to be about like making the be all end all film here. This is a chance for us to experiment and we shouldn't be afraid of failure. And so that was the guiding light for me for the second time around. Like, I want to make a one shot, you know, like, and what if it doesn't work out? That's okay. This is a chance to try something new, you know, and try lots of new things. And we don't always have that freedom as filmmakers to just try and experiment. You know, we're sort of beholden to this idea of like some concept of success or some concept of perfection, you know, and we're all probably perfectionists to some degree, you know, and so it was very freeing to just let that go and be like, I'm just trying to do something here. So I have a hard time, like I haven't released Skyworld as its own film. I've only let it be in the world within the body of the embargo project, because I have problems with the perfection aspect, you know, because I did try to do something. It's not perfect, but I'm happy with what I experimented with. And I'm happy that I made something that speaks to language in a way that was really important to me. You know, I also haven't released this film by itself because it's there's aspects of it that are really personal to me, and that was, you know, dealing with this concept of grief and how language is a touchstone for me, and how, you know, how important it is to sometimes to get some perspective when you're lost in grief or you're lost in an emotion. You know, what is your touchstone? And for me, that was language, and it's always there when I am stuck in something. There's always something more important, you know, like I make films and whatnot, but like I also teach language, and there's nothing that feels more important than that. Sometimes making films feels selfish, you know, and when it feels selfish, I don't know, I try to remember that like we're still building a world where we can see ourselves on the screen. And if people could see us on the screen and recognize our humanity and hear our languages and see our cultures and see that we have survived, then what kind of world would we have? You know, we wouldn't have had this summer where the Canadian government has reacted to our uprisings, you know, the way that they have. If we could be recognized as having all the rights that we should have, then I don't know, I think our work is important. And so it's hard to remind myself it's not selfish. You know, we're still building a thing where I get to see myself. My kid gets to see himself. The kids I'm teaching get to see themselves. Like that hasn't happened yet. So we still work to do.
I love the way that you have turned around. As I understand, the Margot project has a lot of limits or restrictions when you're making a short film for the Margot project. But you have turned around that, and you have made it a very free and liberating experience. And not only that, you have imposed your own restrictions to prove and to show how in control you are, and not the restrictions that the Margot project. I'm not saying that those restrictions are bad, but to me, it's really interesting how you turn it around in the explanations that you were telling us about about the film. It's really amazing. But let me ask you about Skyworld, because you touch different subjects, and one of those is the relationship between First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. For people that don't know anything, how are those relations? How do you see those relations between the three Aboriginal people?
I think that we see ourselves as distinct, that Inuit are a distinct people, and we see a kinship amongst our common history of colonization in this country. But the Métis people, they have their own thing. The Indigenous people are so varied and so similar. It's the First Nations people, rather, not Indigenous people. We're all on a similar pendulum, with dealing with identity issues, with connection to land and language, and I think we have a similar journey, but we're distinct peoples.
Mm-hmm.
And the Inuit, I and the Métis, there's fewer dialects in those nations, whereas in the First Nations people, there's so, like in BC, there's 32 distinct First Nations languages in BC alone, in the province of British Columbia. I'm Mohawk, Tracey's Mohawk, but we come from two different communities, and we have slightly different dialect, of our language. But I could go there and try to understand, and there's, in her community, there's still quite a few first language speakers, whereas in my community there we have one. So it's quite different, but we have built up dozens. We now have dozens and dozens of Mohawk language speakers, but they're second language speakers, so, and people have come to our school, our Mohawk language immersion school, from all over the world to learn how we've been so successful at creating second language speakers. It's very vast. Our country is very big, very many nations, very many cultures and languages. So it's I think that whether you're Cree or you're Mohawk or whatever, we have familiarity with one another, but also recognize that we're distinct.
Your short film is called Skyworld, which I understand it has a very specific meaning in Mohawk. What is the meaning?
Oh, it's so funny talking to people from other cultures, even other First Nations. Like, you're just like remembering, like, oh yeah, you guys are different. Like, oh yeah, you're in Spain. So Skyworld, our teaching in Mohawk culture is that we come from the sky world originally, and that when we pass away, we'll return to the sky world. And so our creation story talks about how the Turtle Island, what we know as North America now, was created by the woman fell from the sky, and that was one of the first beings that came down, and Earth was built on the back of the turtle, and with her body, it was created, originating from the sky world. And so we say things like, children, babies choose us, and they come from the sky world and they choose their parents. And there's lots of teachings about sky world, but it goes to our origin story.
And finally, one important topic that you reflect in your films is the respect to Mother Nature and the environmental impact on the Indigenous communities. Why?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the one of the topics that you reflect in your films is the respect to Mother Nature and the environmental impact on Indigenous communities. Why is that important for you?
I really believe that it's important that that's one of our most central tenets of our culture, is to pay respect and give honor to all of creation. You know, like before we do any meeting, any school day, any ceremony, we put through these words called the Ohandongari Wadekwan, and that means the business before all else. So it's the thing we have to do before we do anything. And what those words are to give thanks and honor all of creation. So we start with thanking the people and Mother Earth and the water and the oceans and the fish and the green growing things and the trees and the food, the life sustaining plants and the fruits and the medicines and the bugs and the free animals and the trees and the winds and the birds and the thunderers and the sun and the moon and the stars. And then lastly, we thank Creator, you know, for all that is provided on earth. And it's our responsibility to put through those words. And I really think that, I don't know, I've thought so much about this, and I this is what my new feature film is about. We're just getting my new film out into the world. But like, imagine if you started every day or everything with this concept of like being grateful for everything. Like, if every person was like that, where would you be? Where would we be on this planet if the central tenet of your culture and your life was to be grateful for everything? So that's really important to me to think about, and I really wanted to present that idea in my new film. But I think it's also there a little bit in other little works that I've done.
Well, so we thank you very much for sharing, and thank you for the challenge that you just gave us to everybody to think about.
I listened to one elder speak about how it's never too early to teach children and babies, you know, about this concept. And he said, you know, we don't have to learn the whole big speech as little babies, or even as new language learners, or people who are just embarking on this. He said, if all you can do is just to say thank you, and just know that that's what those words mean, that you're thanking everything. You know, if you could teach a little baby to say, "Nyawa, thank you," you know, before they go to sleep, or at the start of the day, or at the end of the meal, or whatever it is, you just say thank you, and have that in mind. And like, if that's what's in your mind, that you're thanking everything, then I think that's a nice way to be.
Thank you. Now we are almost at the end. Now we have, I have 3 or 4 questions for everybody. So here, anybody can, you know, intervene. Anybody can talk. There is no. I'm going to just to launch the question to the air, and whoever wants to take it and have a conversation, please be my guest. Is that okay? Does anybody need to have a break, water, bathroom, anything? Well, thank you very much. You're amazing. Thank you. So here in Canada, media from in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Montreal, talk about an Indigenous renaissance in Canada, led by artists. Do you agree with that?
It's an interesting question, which is, and why I'm sort of having a bit of a bump on it, because within our communities, it's nothing new. We have been artists forever, and that has been a big part of the heartbeat of our communities. I think space is finally now being made in the bigger space of Canada, and in the mainstream. That's finally happening, and therefore, you know, what we have to offer is reaching now across the country. But I will say, even, you know, 20 years ago, with the Aboriginal People's Television Network, when that was founded, we have been we have been producing our own content for our own people for the last 20 years. And I mean, I credit APTN, I mean, so much for the strength and breadth of our community, of our filmmaking, content creating community, because the doors have been shut for so long to all of us. And finally with APTN, we had a space for our stories. And now we're going even beyond that. So the answer is both yes and no. We've been doing this forever. But now we're having a larger access, I think, to reach people beyond our own communities. And please, ladies, if you have something to add or you completely disagree with me, no problem.
No, I agree, because when we think about, I think what I respond to when I hear that term, renaissance, rebirth, I think that's what you're saying, is that this is not a rebirth, I think that's where I bump on that term also. It's in a way a little offensive, because we've already been here. We've already been trying and struggling to make work, to exist, to survive, and thrive, and show the beauty of our existence, and that's, I think that rather than a rebirth, it's just an opening of doors, it's just an opening of opportunity. And that's not even a reopening. It's like the door just cracked, and finally we have an opportunity to like access more funding or distribute our films on a larger scale, or and people I think are having an awakening, outside of our communities, that like, oh, like a lot of people don't know, one, that we exist at all. I've had people say to me like, oh, I thought you were all extinct. Real adult humans have said this to me. And so people are having an awakening. It's a real thing that's happening just planet wide, that we've seen, like with Black Lives Matter, with the further acceptance of LGBTQ people and whatnot. Like, it's just people are trying to get woke. And I think that our existence in this world of creating work, is just part of this like waking up and peeping open the eyes at other people's, and we've been the other to the point where we've just been locked out, and now we're allowed to play too with the big kids and make millions of dollars movies and whatnot. And I think that's really important for all of humanity, to see all kinds of people. When you look at your wall of Netflix, and all the little tiles are all white people, that's a problem. So if we can mix that up a bit, I think the world will have an awakening, and it's not a rebirth.
We're taking up space.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a long line of storytellers, and it's a verbal culture. It's an oral history, and my ancestors, my family even, they're not like very loud people, like hear me out, but like I'm a new generation and I'm gonna be heard. I'm gonna take up space. Hear me out. This is not Renaissance, okay, sure, but like, no, we've been here. We're taking up space now, and hear me. I'm gonna make you hear me. And Indigenous film has been there with APTN for like 20 years, but like on Inuit lands, films are starting to be made, and we're taking that space in the world. Hey, film world, the film world is very small, actually. It seems very big, but it is very small. And like Inuit, we're pushing through. Funding is starting to be available. We're not just going to be the people in the corner anymore. We're not just going to be the people that allow Asians or other cultures to portray Indigenous people. No, thank you. We will not stand by that anymore. Move. My turn.
since you mentioned that how difficult it is to make films, movies as an Indigenous or about Indigenous issues in Canada right now.
Does anybody want to answer that?
Sure.
The challenges that we have in the North. Oh, sorry.
No, please. I'll jump in after you.
The challenges that we have in the North are location, terrible internet, low funding. Our flights are extremely expensive. We have limited hotels. Our food's very expensive. So everything costs 3 times more. And so we're competing with the rest of Canada who have this access, who have this like already respect without racism. And it is harder, but our stories are beautiful and we're going to tell them. Sorry, Tracey, you can go ahead now.
I'll add on to that I think, I've been in this business for 20 years, and for the longest time, the majority, the powers that be, again, white people, for the longest time thought of our stories as only being interesting to our own people. Meanwhile, of course, stories about white people are great for everyone. So it makes no sense that is the mentality. But that, I think, has been the struggle, is to convince the powers that be that the stories we have to offer are interesting and valuable and awesome and exciting for a large audience. Because as long as you can't convince them of the large appeal, then the doors don't open. And I think in the last few years, that now is shifting. And I'm going to point to the streamers as changing the game, because the streamers have really embraced telling very, very specific stories from specific communities, and their programs have had global success. So at least here in Canada now, there is that model to point to and say, you're wrong. The idea that, only Indigenous people are interested in Indigenous stories, we now have clear examples of that mentality being wrong. And so I do think they have gotten they are getting a bit braver here, and there are things happening. So in the 20 years that I've been doing this, in the last few years, there's been some movement happening.
It's always interesting or frustrating to hear that, we don't have marquee actors, in Indigenous country. And so when you're trying to finance a film, the financiers want to know who are your stars, and in Canada, the star system, just in Canada broadly, not even in the Indigenous filmmaking world, is kind of a weird concept, like if we build up a famous person, they move to the States and they become, multi-million-dollar actors in the States, but they can't stay here and achieve that level of success. So to hang a star system on our films is really problematic, especially when we're just at the doors just cracked open. So the opportunities for people have been low. I started in the world as an actor and I quit because the opportunities for people who look like me were so minimal and so offensive that I stopped going to auditions. So, say I wanted to be an actor and I kept trying at that for the past 20 years, I would now have opportunities, but for the first 15 years, those opportunities would have been very, very low. So where would I be now? I wouldn't be a marquee actor. So we're just at that start. So it's really frustrating to me, that particular challenge. And that goes from financing to distribution. Like when theater managers don't want to put your movie in the theater because they don't think people will go. And you can have like this is my first feature film, Kayak de Klem 2. I had one of the best or the largest distribution companies in Canada, and it didn't mean anything. It went places because of me, and the work that I did to get it out, and the work of small organizations like Real Canada putting it in schools, and like 20,000 kids have seen my film, because of Real Canada, and because I went there and showed up. It's not the work of our distributors, our sort of long-standing distributors. It's not been the work of theater managers. Like I've learned how, it's really sometimes just up to like one person who owns a theater who says, no, we don't want that film, and we've tried, and somehow I still got our film was still in the top box office 2 or 3 times in the summer we had theatrical distribution, even though it was only in one city at a time. And how can we're looking at these like numbers of like top box office in the country, knowing that it's only been allowed, to be in one theater at a time. And you're competing with a film that's in other films like Han Solo, that's in 150 theaters. You can't compete if you're only allowed to be in one theater. So it's a tricky system, this concept of like success markers, when we haven't been allowed to like be a part of that system at all. So that's a constant frustration. And I look forward to, seeing some of our actors like really, really rise and become recognizable, actors, but that we're still at the beginning of that because we haven't been allowed to play.
Marie-Hélène, for you in being in Nunavut, I guess it's also very difficult to make films from there, no?
No, I mean, what they said is just a portrait of the reality, it's, it's totally that, anywhere. I mean, Nunavut doesn't even have theater. There's only one in Iqaluit, although, there's more than 20 communities. So it's and so when IDI, which is, the distribution company we have, which is Inuit, but they also do other films. But then they want to show films in the north. They go to schools or community center, and they go with the screen or, and a projector and the, a USB key with the film. And then, but the thing is, the film will be free because people don't have the money. Kids are not going to pay $10 or $15 to go see a film, right? So if you want, but if you do show film, the film, the crowd will come and the whole town will see the film. But then to have a success indicator with telefilm, for example, maybe that's too technical. You need to sell tickets and you need to be able to prove, that you sold that many tickets, but you cannot do that in the North. And, probably not in other Indigenous community where people don't have the theater, the movie theater. So it's a whole other system to organize to be able to show Indigenous films in Indigenous communities. It's totally different. Either it goes through television cable, or you go to community center, but then you have to give tickets for free and you have to convince telefilm, listen, 1,200 people saw the film last week and we want to count those tickets although people didn't pay for them, because people are not going to be paying for them. They don't have, the money to pay for them. So it's a whole different ballgame. And the system as is has to recognize that, to me, it's interesting to be able to invent, or to look at how we can reach, communities that are really far, but that are, living this culture that Indigenous filmmakers are putting on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a couple more questions. I mean, it's obvious for what we see right now on this screen. It seems that most of the stories in about the Indigenous people in Canada are told by women. Do you agree with that? And if you agree, why? Tracey, let's start with you.
So it is true that I at least within my network, a lot of my colleagues, my Indigenous filmmaking colleagues, a lot of them are women. And your question as to why that is, I don't know that I can tell you why that is. I don't know that I can tell you why that is. I mean, we're out there doing it. Anybody else have an idea as to why that is?
I don't know why either. And I see it in my language classes too. Like I teach online and I've had over 500 students now go through the programs, and the vast majority of them have been women also. And so I don't know why. And last year, I think Imagine Native Film Festival in Toronto, they even made a point of having a short film program that was films by men, because we have the reverse problem in Indigenous communities that the rest of mainstream Canadian film is, we're seeing this this push for gender parity in telefilm and NFB and our main funding bodies to increase films helmed by women, but we have the reverse problem. So I don't know why. It would be interesting. It would be so interesting to see like a film fund targeted towards Indigenous men. But I think that we are probably at that point where somebody has to do something to address the issue. And maybe the next generation will, sometimes we see these things happen in a generational pattern, but it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next little while. Will men, maybe it's to do with the fact that we all come from matriarchal societies, that, Mohawk people, Hailtook people on my mother's side, we're matriarchal. So it's the women who are leaders, them. So, but that would be sort of a wild guess. Like, I think there's more complex societal issues at play also.
I was just commenting back on like the matriarchs in our family. When I think about my family, it's the women that are leaders. It's the women that will speak up. It's not the man that's going to be like, I decide when we eat and I decide what your name is going to be. No, it's women in my family that are the leaders. And I am the woman that I am today because I come from a long line of Indigenous women, strong ones that I deeply respect. And I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but like, if I think about it, like women had a place in the igloo or in the tent sewing, and men were out there hunting. I don't know, were Inuit women like more quiet on purpose, or were they the leaders within their camps, but men were the ones that are most acknowledged? I don't know. I don't know. Is it just because we're ready? We're done being silent? We're like, I could do this. I'm going to do it. I don't know.